Hello and welcome, and this is part two of our video about world population. Why study population? Why are carbon dioxide emissions so high? We know that CO2 levels are getting higher every year. We know the main cause is things like using fossil fuels for energy. But why is the problem worse than ever now? In 2010 or 2000 or 1990, we were already using fossil fuels and making CO2. But in 2000, we were making more than 1990. In 2010, more than 2000. And now, more than 2010. Clearly, the fact that we are using fossil fuels is not the full answer. There must be something else driving up the amount of CO2 we are making. In fact, we have more alternatives like solar and wind and water to use for energy than we had in the past. That should mean the level of CO2 is going down, but it's not. So something else must be driving it up. Of course, it's several things, but there are two main drivers. The first is people are getting richer. People with more money create more CO2. That is true across all countries and all income levels. So a poor family in Africa who buy their first motorbike will see a big increase in the amount of CO2 that family creates. The total is still small, but it's much bigger than when they walked everywhere or went by bicycle. In a similar way, a middle class family in the USA might get a pay rise. They now have enough money to take a vacation in Europe, which they have never done before. It will increase the amount of CO2 their family creates by flying for about 5 hours each way. The second driver is that the number of people on the Earth, the population, has increased very quickly since 1990. More people equals more CO2. Increasing population is the underlying driver for many of our problems. So that's why we should be interested in population. For example, increased carbon dioxide, increased use of fossil fuel-based fertilizer to grow more food, increased traffic problems, jungle being cut down to create new farmland for agriculture so we can grow enough food for more and more people, more land taken from agriculture as our cities build more and more houses on what used to be farmland, and many, many more things. For so many of our problems, the underlying cause is the bigger and bigger population numbers. So we must study population. We must try to figure out why it is growing so fast and how to cope with the side effects of that. First, some definitions. Birth rate. This is the number of live births divided by the total population. It is often called the crude birth rate because it uses the total population, including men and the women who are too young or too old to have a baby. It's almost always written as a number per thousand. The beauty of writing it like this is that it's very easy to compare rates from different countries or different time periods, even though the total population may be different. So we could compare China 2023, which had 10.65 births per 1,000 people, with China in 1950, which had 44.92 births per 1,000 people. Or with a different country, Mexico in 2023 had 10.48 compared with China's 10.65. Second definition, fertility rate, which we looked at in part one. The average number of babies that would be born to a woman over her lifetime, including women who have no children. So to keep the population level, this must be about 2. So here we have the birth rates and death rates per 1,000 people of the country's population. Countries above the grey line have a greater birth rate than death rate, meaning the total population is increasing. Those below the line have a declining population. And that includes places like Russia, Italy, and Japan. The blue line from bottom left is for no population change. So countries like Russia are already falling. Some like China, South Korea, and the USA are close. African countries are at the top. So here we have more or less the same data, but done on a map. So we have different colors showing what is happening. Brown means 0 to -1 population growth. Light blue means 0 to +1. And darker blue means higher levels. So Russia and China are very low or negative. Most of the rest of the world is getting close. Africa, with the dark blue ones, is still growing quite fast. So we already looked at this in part 1, and it goes back to 10,000 BCE, and until approximately 1800, the population growth was very, very, very slow. And then after a fairly short transition, it became vertical. The first thing to say is what an extraordinary graph. It is almost unbelievable. World population barely changes for about 11,800 years, back to the time when humans first started farming instead of hunting animals and gathering wild food. And then suddenly, after only a small period where it's climbing a little bit, it goes from horizontal to vertical. Not a slow and steady climb, but almost straight up. A change like that is very rarely found in nature. Nature goes for slow and steady evolutionary change, not sudden revolutionary change that goes in the opposite direction. This is only an introduction, so I'm not going to try to explain the graph now. It's not easy to explain, and it is a whole topic on its own later. I put it in here because I want you to know up front what an extraordinary situation we're dealing with. As we saw in part 1, population change equals the number of births minus the number of deaths. So let's look at the number of births. What decides that? The main drivers are firstly, better healthcare. Second, use of contraception. Third, better education, especially for women. Number 4, marriage at a later age. And number 5, higher women's employment. All the things, number 1 to 5 above, are important drivers. But one of the biggest factors, as we saw in part 1, is the number of possible mums. The number of births equals the number of possible mums multiplied by the number of babies per woman. For the last few decades, the number of babies per mum has been getting smaller year by year. But that has been overcome by the fact that the number of mums has been going up. The population has still been rising, albeit at a slower and slower rate. You can think of it like a car going up a hill when the engine stops. The car will continue going up the hill for a while because of its speed in the past, but it will get slower and slower. That is what has been happening to the last few decades. The fertility rate has been falling, the engine has stopped, but the speed from the past, the number of possible mums, has kept the car going up. The next point is huge, 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 huge. Once the population starts to fall, the whole thing happens in reverse. The car starts rolling down the hill. If population is falling, every generation is smaller than the one before. So the number of possible mums is smaller too. Now we have a double whammy. Fertility rate is low, making population fall, and the number of possible mums is lower, also making it fall. We've gone from this, where you had one thing on one side, fertility rate going down, but the number of mums on the other side going up. So we've gone from that to this. Both things on the same side. Once the total population starts to fall, the population of possible mums will go down every year. It will automatically keep going down unless the number of babies per mum starts to increase a lot, enough to overcome the fact that there are fewer possible mums. What we are saying is that once the car has started to roll back down the hill, it will take a huge change to make it go back up again. The importance of the moment in time, a tipping point, when the population stops expanding and starts getting smaller, is huge. There is a lot of evidence that we are very close to that tipping point now. Growth, the speed up the hill, has been slowing every year for a long time. China's population has already started to drop in 2023. The exact timing will vary from country to country, but we are very close. Once we pass the tipping point, the number will automatically go down, unless the number per mum increases a lot. To prevent it continuing to fall, we would have to turn around a long established, powerful trend. For example, in China, until 2016, families weren't allowed to have more than one child. There were big penalties if they did. From 2016, this was increased to 2 per family and to 3 in 2021. Each time there was an increase in babies that lasted about 1 year, and then it continued to drop. We are talking about trying to turn around a really strong, ongoing trend. Alongside this trend is the difference between the number of men and women in the population. For example, in the UK in 1950, there were 2 million more women than men. By 2020, the difference was down to 0.8 million. That doesn't change the number of babies per mum, but it does reduce the number of possible mums in the population. So why would we want to turn it around? This is an excellent question. As we have seen, many existing problems would be greatly reduced if we had fewer people. Imagine you were Harry Potter. You could wave a magic wand and we still had things like internet, social media, mobile phones, etc., that we have today, but the world population went down to what it was in 1960. Keeping within 1.5 degrees for global warming would be reached without having to change over from fossil fuels to make electricity or to electric cars from petrol cars. It would work because for every 2 power stations we have today making electricity from fossil fuels and creating CO2, we would only need 1, half the CO2 and no climate change. This is exactly what is forecast for many countries. By 2100, the population of countries like Italy and Japan will be half what it is now. China will be about 2/3. Fantastic news. But wait, there's more. The reaction of countries like China is to do everything they can to stop the population going down. Why? The answer is simple. Fear. Look again at the world population graph. World population has never gone down in the past, except for very short periods due to war or disease. Nobody has any experience of what will happen if the population continues to drop year after year. You can't ask your gran. It's not in history books. no one knows. That's scary. Not only that, but as explained above, once it starts and the automatic ongoing reductions kick in, it's very hard to stop. Let's look again at the 5 factors driving the reduction: better healthcare, use of contraception, better education, especially for women, marriage at a later age, higher women's employment. Which of them could you reverse? Or would you want to reverse? In many countries like Bangladesh, as you will see in a video we're going to watch later, the government has been encouraging families, and especially women, to follow most of these. And it has worked well. The birth rate has dropped, and people are seeing the benefits of smaller families. If suddenly the government starts encouraging exactly the opposite behavior, they would have a huge credibility problem. People wouldn't trust them anymore. And there's no floor level. Mostly in nature, every trend eventually slows and stops. But it's hard to see this one stopping. If the number of babies per mum is, say, 1.7, which is the present US level, and the level needed to keep the population the same is 2.1, the population will keep dropping and dropping until, in theory, there would be no humans left. Let's not be over dramatic about this. The point is that it doesn't look like there's a point at which the trend will reverse. Some people don't agree about that. They believe that as soon as women realize there is a problem, they will choose to have more babies again, and the problem will go away. It's possible, but it would take a huge social revolution. The incentive for women to have good education and good jobs are huge. It's early days, but the benefits of having women in senior positions in areas like politics and big business are also starting to come through. Out of the 5 factors, it's only practical to look at changing 2 of them. The others are not negotiable. The 2 remaining are number 4, the marriage at a later age, and number 5, higher women's employment. I think changing to marriage at an earlier age can be discounted. If it happened, contraception would still allow couples to control the number of children to the number that they wanted. For most parts of the world, the link between age at marriage and the number of children has already been broken, and there's no reason to think it will come back. If families started to have more children, the impact on family wealth would be heavy. They would lose the woman's income for a while, and they would have the extra cost of raising a child for, say, 20 years. They would also have the extra effort that goes into child rearing. At the moment, they choose not to do that. What would make them change? Let's dig deeper into why they make the choices they do now. Let's look firstly at income. The fewer children, the more absolute and disposable income, and the more free time to enjoy it with less stress. Couples that choose more children choose fewer holidays and holidays close to home instead of trips abroad. They choose lower quality housing because they can't afford as good a house and because they have more people to house. Governments could try to remove these factors. The Chinese government is already trying this with tax breaks and better promotion prospects for people with more children. They could even introduce a living wage for mums who stay at home and look after their children. Where would the money come from? In the past, money from business productivity gains has been channeled into business profits and, to a lesser extent, wages. We could reduce these by taxing businesses and income more to get more to pay the mums. If we want to avoid this, the money from the next big productivity gain, which looks to be AI, would have to be diverted to paying a living wage to mums. In other words, existing levels of income and profits would be maintained, but any increase from better productivity would be given up in favor of paying mums. There's a huge amount of social change built into this idea. Firstly, the attitude to business profits. Secondly, the attitude to wage increases. Thirdly, the attitude to women's role in society. There would be a lot of opposition from men and from some women who are not happy to give up wage increases for this purpose, from businesses not happy to give up extra profit, from people who see this as a backward move for the women's movement as a whole, and from people who don't see any problem and maybe some benefits in falling population. In summary, none of the drivers of women having fewer babies are reversible in the short term. Maybe at some stage this could change, but that's very speculative. The rate of population loss could happen very quickly. If we start with the first generation of 1 million people and the birth rate is 1.6, the second generation is 727,000. The third generation is 528,000, and the fourth generation is 384,000. If we allow 25 years per generation, we are saying that population drops to about 38% of the 2023 level by 2123. That's very rough because it doesn't allow for changes like the life expectancy. But you get the picture. It doesn't take that long. The conclusion from this is that government efforts to stop population dropping are a waste of time and money. They would be much better to focus on adapting to the changes than fighting them. And this is the end, my friend. See you next time.